your nomination to be President of the United States of America.
Kamala Harris delivers a historic acceptance speech at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. We will discuss the policies that she laid out and how her rival, the former U.S. President Donald Trump, is responding. Hi, everyone. I'm Sean Calebs, filling in for Anna Naidu, and you're watching The Heat. "74 days until the U.S. presidential election. The Democratic ticket is now set. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris has officially accepted her party's nomination. It happened Thursday at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. Harris delivered what may be the most important speech of her political career. CGTN's Dan Williams brings us the highlights of what has been an exciting week for the Democrats.
It was the crowning moment of the Democratic National Convention. A passing of the torch, a changing of the guard at the top of the ticket. There were similar scenes on Monday at the beginning of the convention as Kamala Harris made an unannounced appearance. And there were tears too from Joe Biden as he made an unofficial farewell speech. A little over a month before the US president had voiced determination to continue his own re-election bid. His speech defended his achievements in office while heaping praise on Harris, harkening back to the day he tapped her to be his running mate in 2020.
Selecting Kamala was the very first decision I made when I became our nominee. And it was the best decision I made my whole career.
A party-like atmosphere surrounded the convention roll call votes on Tuesday with state-specific songs, Lil Jon stealing the show for Georgia. And as the Harris ticket campaigned in Wisconsin, the Obamas were in Chicago. And both took the attack to the former president, Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump.
His same old con, doubling down on ugly, misogynistic, racist lies as a substitute for real ideas and solutions that will actually make people's lives better. Going small is petty, it's unhealthy, and quite frankly, it's unpresidential.
It has been a constant stream of gripes and grievances that's actually been getting worse now that he's afraid of losing to Kamala. There's the childish nicknames, the crazy conspiracy theories, this weird obsession with crowd sizes.
On Wednesday, Tim Walz, Harris's running mate, took center stage. Just a few weeks ago, much of America knew little about the Minnesota governor. His speech leaned heavily on his backstory as a former teacher and sports coach.
It's the fourth quarter. We're down a field goal, but we're on offense and we've got the ball. We're driving down the field. And boy, do we have the right team.
Palestine will be free.
There were protests outside of the United Center all week, attended by thousands of people. The key demand, a permanent ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas conflict and calls for the US to cut funding to Israel. But for the most part, the demonstrations passed peacefully.
There was no shortage of high-profile guest speakers and performances by celebrity entertainers at this week's convention. But the focus for the DNC was always about Thursday evening, as Kamala Harris accepted the Democratic presidential nomination.
This was the most important speech of Harris's political career, and she quickly zeroed in on her Republican rival.
In many ways, Donald Trump is an unserious man. But the consequences of putting Donald Trump back in the White House are extremely serious.
Her speech outlined a choice for America.
And we know what a second Trump term would look like. But America, we are not going back. We are not going back. We are not going back.
It has been an extraordinary month or so for Harris, but the hard work of campaigning and appealing to undecided voters begins now. The race for the White House going into high gear. Dan Williams, CGTN, Chicago.
Indeed, high gear. For more on the U.S. presidential race, let's bring in our esteemed panel. Joining us from Philadelphia, Craig Green. He's a professor of law at Temple University. Also with us from Boca Raton, Florida, Eric Bolling. He's the host of the Eric Bolling podcast. From Jamaica, Imani Cheers is an associate professor of digital storytelling at the George Washington University. And here in Washington, D.C., Niambi Carter is an associate professor with the School of Public Policy at the University of Maryland. I want to thank all of you for taking time for this important half-hour discussion. Niambi, I want to start with you. Really, Kamala Harris has breathed excitement into the race for Democrats. If you look at polls when Joe Biden was still the candidate, only about 40% of registered Democrats were excited about this race. Now that number's up to about 85%. That party-like fervor really carried through this past week, and we heard Kamala Harris really spell out what she wants to do if she's elected to be the 47th president of the United States. She is vowing a tax cut for the middle class. She wants to have a bipartisan border measure go through as well, and also fight for reproductive rights, unifying the country. And seeing her standing there on the stage, flanked by the flags, a very patriotic look. Here's some of what she had to say.
I will be a president who unites us around our highest aspirations, a president who leads and listens, who is realistic, practical, and has common sense, and always fights for the American people.
She had a big job. She had to convince the U.S. public. How did she do? What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think for the people who were already dyed-in-the-wool Democrats, it was not much convincing to be done there. But I do think she did a couple things to try to speak to Black men who have seen, even though they vote in higher numbers than anyone else, any other kinds of men for Democrats, who've seen some disaffection with the party. I think that's why it was important for the exonerated five to be there last night. I think that was an important signal to send. I think she was also trying to speak to younger voters. I mean, when she called Donald Trump unserious, I mean, yes, it's a word, but it's also part of the popular lexicon that many younger people will be familiar with. And if they're politically astute, that signal could be really important to those who are undecided and, quite frankly, less committed to party than, say, their grandparents or their great-grandparents. So I think she did a good job of looking presidential. I think that's why the dark colors were important. And she was offering, I think, a much rosier picture of the U.S. Than Donald Trump. And, of course, there are lots to pick apart and lots to gripe with. But those kinds of messages tend to do well with voters rather than sort of the doom and gloom messages. And I think that's going to win the day for Kamala Harris here.
Imani, I saw you shaking your head as Niambi was talking there, and she does make some great points. Winning over younger people, energizing the electorate out there as well, but you got to get these people out and to the polls. It's going to be very difficult. She has to win over independents. It's going to be a very close rate, and we know that RFK Jr., through his support behind former President Donald Trump, so what's that going to do to the race? How much more difficult is that going to make it for Harris and Democrats?
I think it's really important to note that Kennedy had about 5% of the independent voters. And that might seem like a small number for pollsters, but it's actually really influential. And what I would like to make sure that we're talking about this evening is the reality of the uncommitted voters. And so, yes, that 5% from Kennedy is going to be definitely a toss-up, but I think it was a really big misstep for the DNC to not allow a Palestinian American to speak throughout the convention. There were thousands of protesters outside of the convention center in Chicago all week. There was a vetted speech available, and that's going to be a big misstep because the reality is it's just going to be enough. and we're talking about percentage points at this point, just going to be enough of individuals, of uncommitted voters, of independent voters who are really unsatisfied with the way in which the Biden-Harris administration has not only dealt with the genocide in Gaza over the last 10 months, but the fact that we have not been able to see a ceasefire, and that is going to be something that's going to be really influential as we move forward into the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, and it's going to be very important in the state of Michigan. A lot of Arab Americans in that state. Talk more about that. How difficult is it going to be? And if indeed, we know that the CIA chief is over in the Middle East now, if indeed they can find some way to forge a ceasefire, what could that do for Harris?
I think it's really important right now that Vice President Harris comes out very vocally and very strongly calling for a ceasefire. And I know that unfortunately it's something that a number of uncommitted and independent voters want to hear, which is an arms embargo. But the reality is we've seen, unfortunately, this play out in history in the past. And I want to remind some of the watchers, the listeners, the voters of the anti-apartheid movement against the Republic of South Africa in the 1980s, right, and really what that did. And I think it's a really important parody, an important moment for us to look at the two similar, not exactly the same, cases where we have very large support for not only a ceasefire, but a large anti-apartheid movement that is looking for Vice President Harris to speak out vocally and to actually make policy really go into practice.
Eric, good to see you again. It's interesting that Imani is talking about missteps, because I've been following you on social media, your podcast this week, and you're talking about missteps, but not from the DNC. You're one GOP representative who has really been outspoken that you believe Republicans have simply dropped the ball.
Yeah, I was probably on here right after Kamala Harris was, I guess, tapped to become the nominee. Good to know that everyone on this panel has won the same number of primaries that Kamala Harris has, yet she's the Democrat nominee. Here's the thing. They allowed whoever the top of the campaign on the Trump side, Susie Wiles, Chris LaSavidia, they've allowed Kamala Harris and the Democrat Party to reinvent Kamala Harris. I mean, the reality is, you know, you spent the first 11 and a half minutes of this show with an extension of the DNC week, which has been a phenomenally successful week for them because they took a very unpopular candidate who couldn't even get out of the primaries in 2020, and they've made her, I would say, the leader right now in 2024 in a matter of a month. They've raised $500 million. She's running on a candidacy of happy, happy, joy, joy, not on policy. She tried to, you know, one time the first thing she did, she tried to steal Trump's idea of no tax on tips. That's a theft. And then, as you point out, during the DNC this week and then during her acceptance speech, you know, she talks about cutting taxes. This has not been a Democrat stand. It's been a Republican point for ages and decades. So I think what they've successfully done is they've reinvented Kamala Harris into something that's a likable candidate, and you got to give them credit. And my point on social media that's blowing up right now and getting hounded from the right, my friends in the Trump campaign, my friends who are, you know, diehard conservatives are saying, what the hell are you doing? I said, well, you got to wake up. If you want to win this, you've just let her take the lead. I don't care what the polls are saying. Yeah. Polls are saying they're tied. They let her take the lead. To reinvent Kamala with camouflage baseball caps and have the Thursday evening kickoff with the Star Spangled Banner, a national anthem sung by the Dixie Chicks, now called the Chicks. They're stealing Trump's thunder. It's a brilliant campaign strategy. And my point is, Trump, let's talk about this after the debate. The debate is for me, whoever wins that debate is the next president.
That's going to be interesting to see. Now, Donald Trump traveled to Arizona on Thursday to talk about border security. And that's one area that I think Republicans have repeatedly gone after Harris. Here's some of what Trump had to say about the border issue.
It was weak, it was ineffective, and it would have allowed, as you know, millions and millions of people to pour through, and largely unvetted. It was a horrible bill. It was a weak bill, and they don't need a bill. All Biden had to do is look to the border and say, close the border. He didn't need a bill. He knows that. They didn't want a bill. The bill was terrible. If it was good, I would have approved it.
You know, Eric, Republicans have been trying to get Trump to talk about issues, not crowd sizes or who's more attractive in this race physically. But Democrats and Republicans have not passed any kind of significant border measure since 1986. So don't you think the GOP has some degree of guilt involved in this?
None whatsoever, Sean. When Trump left office, or I think in the April of that year, there were 17,000 border crossings. Now there are 300,000 a month in 1 month. He had it. He was on his way.
But that number's dropped significantly.
Allow me to just point out something right here. That clip you played was the problem. And it's what I really went crazy this morning on, was that this Trump, I don't know what this is. He was in Michigan a couple of days ago. You could barely even hear him. The clip you just played, what did they even say? They need to unleash Donald Trump, 2016 Donald Trump. This 2020 reboot of Donald Trump, which he failed at in 2020, that's what they're doing right now. And if the Republicans want to win, bring back the original Donald Trump and stop playing games with little pieces of paper and this quiet demeanor of Trump. Let him unleash, take the reins off the man and let that stallion run.
Okay. Craig Green, thanks for your patience. I apologize for taking until 16 after to get to you. But we've talked about Gaza and the effect on the race a bit earlier, and it really is going to come down to a handful of states, including Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. As we mentioned, home to a large number of Arab Americans, and voters there have been outspoken about the atrocities. Here's some of what Harris had to say about that ongoing situation.
I will always stand up for Israel's right to defend itself, and I will always ensure Israel has the ability to defend itself, because the people of Israel must never again face the horror that a terrorist organization called Hamas caused on October 7. At the same time, what has happened in Gaza over the past 10 months is devastating. So many innocent lives lost. Desperate, hungry people fleeing for safety over and over again. The scale of suffering is heartbreaking.
Yeah, more than 40,000 now dead in Gaza. Craig, was Harris's speech just the acknowledgement of the atrocities? Is that going to be enough? Is that going to sway voters?
Yeah, I think there's no way to know, but there is a deep irony here, and I think this goes to the point of how many policies are out there. In terms of the Israel-Gaza issue, the two parties are actually different and divided. And the Republicans are, of course, much more supportive of Israel and the current regime than the Democrats. And in terms of policies, one of the first policies Donald Trump announced in Iowa about a year ago, a little over a year ago, was that he wanted to bring back something people may remember, the Muslim ban. He said stronger and better than ever. And so I think, I think what you're seeing in the Democratic Party, and you saw at the convention and the protesters, is a real problem and a real schism for them politically. But it's so unclear how it is that motivates anyone to certainly not to vote for Trump, but how many of the folks are going to stay home in light of that issue. If I could just mention a couple of other policies that I think are out there as divisions. Another huge policy for the Trump administration, Trump campaign, is a mass deportation of 1 million or perhaps 11 million residents of the United States, which I think all economists agree would be a complete recession, along with another policy talked a lot about are tariffs of perhaps 60% involving Chinese imports and 10% for the rest of the world. Drill, baby, drill. But it turns out that the oil and gas production in the United States has already hit a record and will hit another record next year. I think that the policies that are at stake are really so small currently in the popular discourse, and especially when you think of the undecided voters or voters who might be swayed. I think they're looking for much more of what you saw from the DNC. You saw a candidate who was serious, who was smart, who was informed, who was not a Marxist, who was a presidential person. And I think that those images it's very hard to know at these very narrow margins. But I think that's been the real dominant theme of the campaign so far. And it's not clear whether the deciding factor will be some set of legitimately, globally upset voters who stay home, for example, in Michigan, or people who just are convinced that a party of change, a party of positivity, this is the term the Democrats use, a party of joy, whether that's better than an image of American carnage, of going back to sort of the COVID era, the Trump era. I think it's not clear how all these things are going to work out, but I definitely agree that the debate will clarify a lot of things, I think.
It's going to be interesting. Niambi, the economy, of course, always front and center in Americans' minds right now. And we heard Eric talk about the Republicans have been the party of tax cuts, but I think a lot of critics would argue it's more or less to the wealthy, and what Harris wants to do is focus hers more on the middle class. Let's talk about what has been going on in Wyoming. Now, the Democrats have said they definitely want to keep a hands off when it comes to the Fed. And Jerome Powell speaking up there today, moving markets. If indeed we do get the rate cut coming, as everyone expects in September, perhaps 50 basis points, and the economy continues to improve, what could this do for Harris?
Well, I mean, look, most people don't know what any of that means. I'm not an economist. Most of us aren't. And so what people know are the dollars and cents in their bank account, in their checks, what they have to pay at the grocery store, how many groceries they get for this amount of money that they got a year ago, how much cereal is in the box, right? That's what people know. So if this can actually show or improve the lives of people, I think that's going to have to be the message. How we got there, people don't really care. People care about what their check looks like. People care about how far their money goes. People care how much it costs to put gas in their tanks. That's what people care about. So I think the technical side of this, right. Sure, I think people are like, yeah, great, do that. Whatever it takes to get that money in my account is what I actually care about. So I think if this can happen, if those, mortgage rates continue to go down and those kinds of things, then yeah, I think that does bode well in November. And this is why I don't kind of look at polls until September and October, because people still have decisions to make.
74 days is certainly a long way away. Eric, I want to get your thoughts on the economy, and can the Democrats run on that right now?
I'd just like to point out, Niambi, a quarter or half point rate cut is not going to put more money in the average American's bank accounts. They're not going to be able to spend more. It's not even going to. Well, you did. Actually, you did. If you want
what I said is people don't care about the technical aspects of the economy. What people care about is whether their lives are better. I didn't say that it would do much. I just said people don't care about how they get there.
In response to the rate cut.
Don't characterize what I said. Don't do that.
Okay. Let's
if I
step back a bit. Okay,
I'm not an economist, but I play one on TV. Here's the reality. The reason why rates were raised is because of Joe Biden's policies of overspending and not allowing companies, specifically the energy industry, to produce and deliver lower priced gasoline the way the Republicans did, the way Trump had gasoline and prices below $2. So as inflation was rising, the Fed had to raise interest rates to calm down the inflation. So bringing them down a little, you can't say it's going to be a great boon to Kamala Harris if that happens. It's because they're coming down, is because of the Joe Biden overspending my government, handing out free money, policies that caused the rates to spike in the first place.
Eric, I've talked to you a number of times, and I think you're a great spokesman for the GOP, but your frustration seems palpable right now. How frustrated are you with the way things are going?
I'm concerned, Sean, because I've said this before. I said Trump will be the last Republican president in my lifetime. That was when he was president. He lost in 2020. Everyone said, oh, he's not going to win again, right? You said, and I said, Trump will be. So he could have won in 2024. It's their last hope. If they don't lock this 4 years of Trump down, throw away the key, it's going to be a Democrat president, Oval Office for decades, if not longer. I'm not saying that they can't win state, senators and state elections, but the national presidential election, the country is moving so far left so fast. This is the last chance to at least put a little bit of the brakes on. A lot of us call us old schoolers, aren't ready for, naked gay men in the street, trans people in the street in front of children, the press of the liberal leftist push in America. I want common sense for at least a few more years and delay the inevitable, I guess, a little bit. But I am very nervous right now because I think that the people who are talking into Trump's ear are giving him bad advice. And I think he is very, very close to risking losing this election, which he had in the palm of his hand for the better part of 2 years.
Okay. Craig, it is going to be a tight race, and a lot of it is going to come down to these states that are very contested, and there's a good chance that Trump is not going to accept the results, or at least fight the results. What happens if that plays out the way it did back in 2000?
Yeah, I think it's a real, that's another real theme for the DNC, was to stress the idea this is someone who doesn't accept court decisions he doesn't like and doesn't accept elections he doesn't like. The difference is this time, of course, he won't be the sitting president trying to mobilize the FBI or the Department of Justice or other party insurrectionists. And so I think that no one should expect him to accept the results of the 2024 election if he loses any more than 2020. But I don't think that's a selling point for him. I think that's a losing point. And I just want to sort of mention the policy side of Harris is that she's, I think, putting together interest rates and mortgage rates with $25,000 down payment to try to help people get homes. So not just groceries, not just cars, not just gasoline, but to locate homes, and has a plan to provide incentives for 3 million units of middle-class housing. And I think those are some policies that I think you can expect to reach people in the future. But absolutely, insofar as the United States has been a 50-50 country at least since 2000, and everything seems to be a little bit chaotic. But I think that as far as things have gone so far, I think the Harris administration has done an awful lot of things right in a very short amount of time, and the remaining days will remain exciting and interesting, but I think there's a lot of those things have already been set out.
I'm sorry. Imani, we have about 1 minute left. I was talking to a Democratic source, friend of mine, and said, when is Harris going to give a big interview to a newspaper, TV, whatever? His answer was after the race. Do you think, A, that's going to happen? Because she has everything to lose if it doesn't go well. But that does put a lot more pressure on these debates.
It gives a lot more pressure, but I think Vice President Harris is very strategic in the media in which she chooses to participate in. So whether that be engaging with social media and being on TikTok, her campaign, or other places. But it's very strategic, and I believe that her campaign will most likely very soon participate in the chosen media that they feel is best suited for her campaign.
That's an interesting choice, the chosen media. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. I really want to thank all four of you for taking time and shedding some light on this. It is going to be a wild 2.5 months moving forward. We still have a lot to go, the debates. I hope we can chat again with you guys in the near future. Thank you so much. And that's it for this edition of The Heat. I want to thank all of our guests, of course, and I want to thank you for watching. I'm Sean Calebs here in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.